It seemed that Karolina was simply hiding her pregnancy. No one knew that she was pregnant. I mean, no one outside the household, because the people at home must have known about it very well. Indeed, she rarely appeared anywhere in the village. She was rarely seen, she rarely went out. Welcome to another Criminality Patrol episode. Some of these stories we talk about, especially the criminal ones, almost take us back to medieval times. It seems that today, in 21st century Poland, such a thing couldn't happen. Do you remember? We talked, for example, about that situation where a woman was kept in a barn for 4 years. Her partner abused her, beat her, humiliated her, raped her. This all went on for 4 years. In the middle of the village, and what's more, his parents lived right across from them. It seemed as if no one knew about it. No one looked for this woman for 4 years. Then we told the story of Piotr, a 56-year-old man who had sexual relations with his daughters for many years. When his children were born, they were killed and buried in the basement. Well, this story is also similar in some way. It also seems that we haven't created any kind of system, whether it's a system of social control, social care, or the police. Something that would prevent such stories from happening. However, there's also the question of how many such stories there are, because it seems, and there are many indications, that despite everything, there are still a lot of such situations, such families, such things in Poland. I invite you to watch this next episode.
Do you like listening to crime stories? In our work, we often come across cases that can't be covered in a short, several-minute episode. That's why we created the Criminal Patrol profile on Hero Hero. It's a place for those of you who want something more. Why is it worth subscribing to Criminal Patrol on Hero Hero? For €6 a month, you get access to exclusive video materials not available to the public, the ability to watch our regular videos completely ad-free, and the ability to watch. Access to unique archives and documents, including files from the most interesting cases and witness interrogation protocols. But more than just content access, it truly supports our mission. Thanks to your subscriptions, we can record new reports and each of you becomes part of our team. Subscribe at herohero.co/Kryminalny Patrol. The link is also in the video description. All supporters on Patreon or YouTube will get a free Hero Hero Access voucher from us. See you!
This is a story from less than 2 months ago, November 14th of last year, which is 2025. Borowa is a small village with about 500 inhabitants in the Kłobok County in Silesia, a peaceful, ordinary village. It's tucked away a bit in a pine forest, but it's not an unknown village at all, because nearby there's the Ostrowi Reservoir, or rather a retention basin. A lot of people come there, enjoy the peace and quiet, and simply come there to relax. So there are many tourists, lots of small camping cottages hidden in that pine forest, so it's not a village in the middle of nowhere. On November 14th, an ambulance drives through the village early in the morning, so it somehow disrupts the daily rhythm of the village. Of course, people immediately go to their windows to see what's happening, where the ambulance is going. Maybe someone felt unwell and the ambulance stops in front of one of the houses a bit on the outskirts of the village. It was called for a young woman. The ambulance arrives at the scene, a call for a young woman. It turns out that it's already too late for help. This young woman is basically still a girl, 23-year-old Karolina. The doctor arrived, confirmed the death, and there was nothing left for him to do but fill out the so-called death certificate. And that's basically it at this point. Well, a young girl died and nobody knows why. The paramedics who were on the scene couldn't really figure it out, so of course the police were called. And in such cases, the prosecutor is also notified. He decides what to do next, what to do with the body. Of course, as a rule, it should always be the case that whenever a young person dies, the body is sent to the Department of Forensic Medicine for an autopsy. And that's what happens. In this case, Karolina's body was transported to Katowice. An autopsy was performed there, and the doctor determined that Karolina died during childbirth. It was surprising, astonishing, because nothing indicated that. If she died at the moment of childbirth, there must have been some complications, probably a hemorrhage occurred. So where is the child? The police were notified about it. Well, it's obvious that the police and the prosecutor's office have to clarify the matter. Karolina, who died, had lived in this house for 6 years. She moved in when she was still a very young girl. She was only 17 at the time. This house looks very neat. The facade was recently renovated. There are solar panels on the roof. And by the wall there's also a heat pump. I'm saying this so we can see that someone was behind all of this. Someone took care of it. There were probably some subsidies. That the people who live in this house know how to get around, know how to talk to other people, know how to fill out various forms and papers, so they are resourceful. That's how it really was. Karolina's partner is a master who is 10 years older. He lived in this house. Resourceful people, able to do a lot to fix things. The family never used social assistance in any way. There were no problems there. The police never came. An ordinary, normal home where nothing special happened, where life went on in its usual rhythm. But in that house, besides Karolina and Michał, there were also his two brothers, as well as Michał's parents, including his mother Iwona, a 56-year-old woman. It was known that the brothers simply went to work, working on construction sites. The women supposedly worked in the fields or in the forest. They didn't have regular jobs. They were often seen together walking somewhere toward the river. There were also conversations about alcohol. Some people said they drank like everyone else, nothing unusual, while others said that lately there had been more alcohol. But whichever way you look at it, nothing special was happening in that family. They lived in their own rhythm. As I mentioned, Karolina moved into that house at just 17. A year later, when she was 18, she had her first child, and 2 years later, her second child. These children were seen with Karolina in the village. People knew that she had those two children. Back then, where she used to live, there was a much bigger farm. There was a horse, there was a cow. But like most farms of that kind, it simply stopped existing. It's simply not profitable anymore these days. Probably, just as a side note, soon you'll only be able to see a cow in the zoo, but that's a completely different topic. A large farm. But as I said, it was functioning. These people lived normally. One of the brothers was even a volunteer firefighter, and everyone just lived their lives. So it was a surprise for the police officers as well, because the police had no information that anything was happening there. They went to the house and started asking where the child was, since Karolina had died as a result of childbirth. It seemed like the family had something to hide. The search began, and indeed, in the house, in one of the closets, they found a dead newborn wrapped in a towel. Well, that was a surprise because the family hadn't said anything about it. The paramedics, when they arrived, also didn't know that Karolina had died in this way. So why was it kept a secret? It seemed that Karolina was simply hiding the pregnancy. No one knew that she was pregnant. I mean, no one outside the household, because the people at home must have known about it very well. In fact, she rarely appeared anywhere in the village. She was rarely seen. She rarely went out. Presumably, they decided that she wouldn't be under the care of any doctor, any gynecologist. She didn't have any scheduled delivery date. She wasn't in any hospital. And it was decided that if she gives birth, then she gives birth. No one would investigate where, in which hospital she gave birth or how. However, no one expected that this young girl would die as a result of childbirth, that her condition would be critical, severe. Only then was help called, and that girl would not survive childbirth. But we have to remember that this wasn't her first pregnancy, that subsequent pregnancies certainly weakened her body, and it was easy to predict that such complications would occur. We don't know about the police officers at this moment either. We can only guess, but we can't talk about it. Because the police officers in that house found the remains of another newborn, it was already the second dead child. Of course, the body of that child was handed over to the Department of Forensic Medicine. There are no autopsy results at this moment. There will be further clarifications as to whether it is Karolina's child. Everything points to that. There will also be findings regarding paternity, who is the father of this child and what the cause of death was. But we can assume at this point that it happened in a similar way. That simply Karolina didn't go to any gynecologist, didn't see any doctor, no one knew about it, and she just gave birth at home. If the child survived, was strong enough, made it through, then those children lived. But if the children died, didn't survive the birth, there was no outside help, then the bodies of those children were hidden. The story, I would say, is terrible because it seems that in such a situation, in a home like the one I described earlier, help from a doctor should be something obvious. Of course, news that the bodies of newborn children were found in a house spreads very quickly around the village. That was the case here as well. We all saw how the television crews came to the village. There were journalists. A lot was said about it, and people who lived there were interviewed as well. It was a shock for everyone. It was the kind of thing that was just unbelievable. Among others, there was an interview with an elderly lady named Genovefa. I'm mentioning this because we'll come back to her later. You could see her riding a bicycle. She stopped, talked to the journalists, and said that for her it was a huge shock. Yes, people were really going through all of this. They were asking themselves why. Why didn't they look for help? Why wasn't there a doctor? Well, no one had an answer to that. I think that even today we can't find an answer to that question. Currently, some people have been detained while others are temporarily arrested for 3 months. and Michał, her 27-year-old partner, and Michał's mother, 56-year-old Iwona. The charges they face state that they directly contributed to putting Karolina in danger of losing her life and unintentionally contributed to her death. The situation was such that until the end, they hoped and believed that Karolina would pull through. It's possible that in previous situations it was similar, that things worked out then, but this time, when they realized that Karolina was really in bad shape, they called an ambulance at the last moment, but it was already too late for help. Before the ambulance arrived, they wrapped the newborn's body in a towel and hid it in the closet. They are under arrest for 3 months and face up to 5 years in prison. Well, of course. The final verdict will be issued by the court. However, morally, at this point, everyone who has heard about this case is definitely blaming them. But we have to remember that there were many more people in the house. And all those people certainly knew about the pregnancy and everything that had happened before. Well, they probably had to know or realize it by watching. Certainly this family's situation is not cheerful. Mikhail is in custody, his mother is in custody, 2 uncles, and it's unknown what fate awaits them. The situation is tough, especially since the police must be suspicious. From what we know, the police are also preparing to continue searching for possible bodies. Because after all, you can't rule out that there were more births that ended this way. We'll see about that because nothing was found there. But the police want to use a ground-penetrating radar, and as soon as the weather conditions improve, they'll take the radar and search the area. Whether they'll find anything, of course, we don't know, but they have to assume. They will, of course, various types of tests, including paternity tests, but I would say today everything points to the fact that it was like this. Karolina, a 17-year-old girl, unaware, with no experience and probably no guidance either. From what we know, her father died very early, apparently in a tragic way. She came to a home where she didn't get that kind of knowledge either. This is a kind of tragedy for a lonely girl, a lonely young mother who doesn't know what to do in such a situation. I also think that maybe it's not entirely true that Karolina didn't use any kind of care. We don't know. I think that from what I know, even the police suspect that maybe there was someone else in the house, I don't know, like some woman, sort of like a midwife, someone who helps in such situations. Maybe there's some secret that just needs to be uncovered. To answer that question, maybe someone was helping Karolina who doesn't have medical knowledge, doesn't have that kind of experience, and does it more like someone who secretly helps in such situations. Maybe right now we don't know who that is, but the police will definitely have to answer that question as well. Maybe there's still some secret in that house. This case obviously shows a kind of tragedy, but it also shows a certain kind of mentality. A young mother, a young girl gets pregnant. Theoretically, she's under her family's care. She's not under a doctor's care. She doesn't tell anyone about it. She gives birth. People also don't ask questions about where the child came from, where the birth took place, because such questions simply aren't asked. I would say this, just like we started this episode, I think that's a kind of problem because we also took a report which shows that 1 in 5 Polish women between the ages of 18 and 29 has never been to a gynecologist. We all know very well what the healthcare system is like, but we also took a report from the Supreme Audit Office which shows what the accessibility to a gynecologist is like. It turns out that there are towns or areas where one gynecologist is responsible for several thousand, maybe even tens of thousands of women. Of course, it's impossible to get an appointment with him. Sometimes you have to travel 50 kilometers to see such a gynecologist, so there may be even more situations like this. These situations result not only from the fact that it's hard to see a gynecologist, but also from this certain Polish mentality. Of course, the case will continue. It has only just recently started. This is another tragedy showing that such things are still happening in Poland in the 21st century. We are asking questions, we are wondering ourselves, and for many of these questions, it's hard to find an answer. At least it's hard to find a logical answer. I mentioned earlier about Ms. Genovefa, the one who talked about it, who experienced it, and in a way, she is also a victim of all this. Of course, indirectly, because when she was riding her bike on November 14th, she talked about it a day later, on November 15th, and she was found dead not far from her home. Roughly 100 meters away, she was off her bike. She likely felt unwell and didn't ride again that day. It also seems that probably her heart couldn't take it. Well, the woman definitely went through a lot. She was affected by what happened, and she died in this tragic way. And that's all for today in this, I would say, difficult episode, because this isn't a typical story about a criminal case like the ones we usually talk about. It's a difficult topic, but we have to talk about such things, and that's it for today. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and as always, take care.
Do you like listening to crime stories? In our work, we often come across cases that can't be covered in a short several-minute episode. That's why we created the Criminal Patrol profile on Hero Hero. It's a place for those of you who want something more. Why is it worth subscribing to Criminal Patrol on Hero Hero? For €6 a month, you get access to exclusive video materials not available to the public, the ability to watch our standard videos completely ad-free, and access to unique archives and documents, including files from notable cases, such as witness interrogation protocols. But it's not just about access to content. Above all, it's real support for our mission. Thanks to your subscriptions, we can record new reports. Each of you becomes part of our team. Subscribe at herohero.co Kryminalny Patrol. The link is also in the video description. Everyone who has supported us via Patronite or YouTube will get a free voucher for Hero Hero. See you soon.